Good morning. Today we are going to be concluding our reading through the book of Mark, the gospel account of Mark, and this will be the third time for us going through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so I'm not going to spend just a whole lot of time detailing and all of those things, talking about what happened, because we're very familiar with it now. Rather, I'm going to talk about more so the significance of everything that happened in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus and what that means for us today. And so we're going to be looking at chapters 13 through 16. And so before we get to the betrayal and the plots to kill Jesus and Judas betraying and then the centurions coming to capture Jesus, we started 13 and we see Jesus, he foretells the destruction of the temple. He says, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. He talks about, as we've seen from the other gospel accounts, how he's going to tear down the temple, and in 3 days he's going to raise a new one that's not going to be built by man's hands, but rather it is Jesus Christ who's going to be raised up from the dead, and he is going to be our sacrifice and all of those things. And so he talks about that, and then Peter and James and John and Andrew, they ask him, tell us, when are these things going to happen? And Jesus goes in this time telling them about the end times, and of course, we know that Jesus, he tells them about the famines, he tells them about the persecution, the wars, the outbreaks, the riots, all of those things. He says there's going to be earthquakes, and there will be famines. And then he says, these are but the beginning of the birth pains. He says this is only the beginning of everything that is going to happen. And then he starts to go into these applications, is what I'm calling. And every time you see a conjunction, he gives them a command or an application to go by while they wait on the end times to get here. And that is the significance in the end times discussions that Jesus has with them every single time. He is not so much concerned about when they are going to happen. He's not concerned about what all is going to happen per se, but rather he wants them to catch this point that they are to be on guard. And they are to endure to the end of their lives. So that whether they see tribulation, whether they see Jesus return or not during their lifetime, isn't so much the concern as much as Jesus wants them to know, hey, you need to be living for me all the way through your life. And if I come back during your lifetime, so be it. But rather, you just need to be on guard. And so he says that several times throughout this, verse 9, but be on your guard, for they will deliver you over to councils, and you will be beaten in synagogues, and you will stand before governors and kings for my sake to bear witness before them. And the gospel must first be proclaimed to all the nations. He says, so listen, you're gonna suffer trials, and you're going to suffer temptations all the way up to the end times. He says you're going to suffer all of these things. You're going to be persecuted against. But remember what you are doing this for is for the Gospels to reach the end of the nations. And he says, before I come back, the Gospels will have reached all nations. Then we get to verse 13, and he makes another conjunction. And he says, and you will be hated by all for my name's sakes, but the one who endures to the end will be saved. This brings to light a couple of things. Number one, salvation is for those who endure. It is why we believe in perseverance of the saints. It is that those who are truly saints will endure. But it shows me this also. Salvation is a process. It is not just something that we experience and it's a done deal. We never experience anything else. You know, we get out of hell free card and then we're done with it. No, salvation is a process. We have been saved. We are continuing to be saved, and we will be saved when we are glorified into heaven. And so he says, those who endure to the end will be saved. And then jump down to verse 23. He says, but be on guard. He says it again. I've told you all things beforehand. It is very similar to when we were looking at Matthew and Jesus was telling them of these things. He says, you are children of the day. Therefore remain awake, remain alert. He says, remain sober-minded. In other words, it's pretty clear here what he means by this. Be on guard. Live your life for my name's sake. Don't let the persecution, don't let the trials, don't let the tribulations knock you off course. Rather, guard yourself. We read in Ephesians 6, the armor of God. Put on the armor of God so that you can sustain the blows of the evil one, the attacks of the evil one. He says, so be on guard. And so he then jumps down to verse 26, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in clouds with great power and glory, and then he will send out the angels and gather his elect from the four winds, from the ends of the earth to the ends of the heavens. He talks about the elect a couple times in this passage, and those are the ones who are saved. I mean, those are simply the ones who have received the gospel. And we know that salvation belongs to the Lord, and so we know that the Lord knows who is saved. He knows who's going to be saved. And so he says, for those who are elected, they will persevere to the end. They will receive salvation, and I will come and gather them at the end of time. And then we jump into chapters 14 all the way to the end of Mark and 16. And I just want to quickly talk about this for just a moment because this is our third time reading this. We're going to read it one more time, and it never gets any less impactful. As a matter of fact, it just draws me to Jesus Christ the more and more I read it. But I want to explain real quick the significance of the death, burial, and resurrection. We display it all the time through baptism in our churches. We have so many people who profess to be dead to their old life, raised with Christ, and now they live a new life. And so I just want to kind of talk about the significance of the death, burial, and resurrection. Well, if you remember, if you've read through the Old Testament, one of the things you might be drawn to is the death of Jesus Christ. And when he gets into chapter 15, verse 34, it says, and at the ninth hour Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Psalm 22 is a messianic psalm. And Psalm 2 resonates with the entire event of Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. From the being plotted against all the way to the lots that are cast for Jesus' garments by the soldiers, to Jesus Christ crying out, my God, why have you forsaken me? This is the significance of why Jesus came. It was to come to seek and to save those who are lost, and through his death, burial, and resurrection, make atonement for their sins and liberate them from the slavery of sin, heal them from the disease of sin. And so the point of Psalm 22 is to show this event, to show how Jesus was coming as a humble servant who was to die on the cross for the sins of the people. In Matthew, the focus was built around Jesus fulfilling Old Testament prophecies to show the Jews how Jesus came, not how they were expecting him to come. And Mark kind of carries with it this same idea that Jesus came to fulfill the prophecies that were made about him, but he didn't come and do it the way everybody thought he was going to do. He didn't come banging down doors and just causing wars and causing riots in the streets. No, he came as a servant. He says, I did not come to serve, I did not come to be served, but rather to serve. Let that be a lesson for us today. That Jesus came as meek. Jesus came as gentle and lowly. Gentle and humble. Those are the ways that Jesus came. And it was the exact opposite of the way the Jews thought of him, thought of the Messiah that was to come, and so they rejected him. But as we know, Jesus Christ is the true Messiah, and it is his death, burial, and resurrection on the cross that promises salvation for the elect, that promises perseverance for the elect. That is what 13 and 14 talks about. That the elect, the ones who are saved, can look forward to the coming of Christ with confidence and have joy in those times and be on guard and persevere because they have the salvation of the Lord. And so my prayer for you this morning is that as you finish up 13 through 16, tomorrow we're going to look at Galatians 1 through 6. My prayer is that you will find your confidence, defense in the Lord, in Jesus Christ, who came and died on the cross for our sins so that they could be atoned for. And if you have not repented and have not turned to the Lord, my prayer is that you will be drawn by him to salvation so that you can be saved. Let me pray for you. Father, I thank you for your word. God, I thank you that in the midst of trials and temptations, God, we can know that you are our confidence. God, it is your salvation granted to us. It is a gift to us. It allows us to persevere to the end, God, where we will be glorified and brought into heaven and given a new body, that we will be given the access to eternally praise you and lift up your name. God, I thank you for sending your Son to die on the cross for us, God, realizing that we did not deserve him. God, that was our cross that we should bear, God. But because of your love, God, you sent him to die in our place. The sin that was heavy and burdening to us, God, you placed on your Son. So, God, because of that, we know that we can look forward to his second coming, God, with confidence and joy, because we know we will be saved. So, God, be with us, lead us, guide us, and direct us in this time. Lord, continue to reveal to us your glory in your word. And it is in your name that I pray. Amen.